Welcome everyone. Today it's a pleasure to have Matt Johnsson here, an incredible aerospace expert and founder of Marble Aerospace. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Antonis. Happy to be here.
Great to have you here. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your background as a whole?
Yeah, sure. So by trade, I'm an aerospace engineer. I studied aircraft design in the UK, and then I went to work for Airbus, the aircraft manufacturer in Bristol. And I work specifically in their future projects office. So that's the one that does secretive future aircraft, like electric propulsion, hydrogen, these types of things. And then I left to start Marble, which is what I do now. And broadly Marble, what we do is we build drones like the one behind me, and we operate them to do marine monitoring. So it's like, monitoring of whales, monitoring of legal fishing, pollution, these types of things.
All right, that's interesting. So how did you get into that industry then?
It was pretty natural to go from aerospace in Airbus to drones, because the principle of how you design a large plane or a small one are mostly the same.
Okay.
So I guess maybe the first answer is like, how did I get into aerospace in the first place? And so it's like when I talk to an investor and I pitch like, why do I do what I do? I usually have a photo of me from I think I was probably 3 years old, in a small general aviation airplane. So like the small with a single engine kind of thing. So I'm in that plane on top of 3 pillows, and I'm there because my dad is into aviation. So I've basically been flying since I was 3 or something. I've just always been very passionate about aerospace, probably from my family. And so I think it's just natural to work in that space. And then from Airbus to drones, I think it's just, it's very hard to innovate when you're talking about a plane that transport people, where, you can see most of the plane when you go to the airport. Unless you're an aerospace geek, you can't really tell the difference between them. So there isn't that much innovation in that space. So if you're someone excited about innovation and building new things and iterating and whatever, it's just way more interesting to do it in drones where you have more things going on at the minute. So that's why I went from, being a passionate kid about aerospace, going into the big company, the most exciting department, that secretive one, and then went to build a drone company.
All right, that's nice. And what about your Marble company?
Well, I guess the main thing is, I think it's just very difficult to understand in general what's happening on the planet anywhere. I think sometimes people have the misconception of how well we understand and we can monitor things, because you go on Google Maps and you can see the picture, it's especially if you go in a city, you have the 3D model and you're like, wow, satellite is so great, and so you can see everything. The thing is, those images, they're actually not from satellite most of the time. They're from planes that are flown every few years, or maybe a bit more often if it's an area that is of interest to Google. And so from that image, people think, there's just satellite that every day give you that image, or every hour, but that's not the case at all. It's just very, very punctual, which means that actually satellite don't give you good data on what's happening even on land, but let alone at sea. So at sea, basically, you're free to do whatever you want. It's just free for all. And it's a problem because we're starting to care more and more about the environment, about how much carbon is sequestered into algae, about how well do you manage the fish stock, are people following regulation for fishing, these types of things. So it's becoming important to know what's happening at sea. And right now there are no tools to do it. The only way you do it is satellite, which isn't good enough because you don't have the resolution, and also satellite only come by typically, maybe once a day. So it's not like a satellite. You can't say I want the data tomorrow at 3 p.m. It'll just come at whatever orbit it is on, and it's not going to stop because you want a photo 5 minutes earlier or something. So basically, because of this, you can't monitor, and so you need new tools, and that's why we're starting to use drones for this mission.
All right, that's interesting. So what has been the biggest game changer for Marble Aerospace, let's say, in the past year?
The biggest game changer? I guess there's probably 2 different things. One is we started flying our new aircraft, which is the one behind us.
All right.
Because the one we used to use was a the first iteration you do as a startup is typically called an MVP, for minimum viable product. And when you design this, it's meant to be, as an engineer, something you're ashamed of, because you don't have much budget when you start a company, so you have to do the crappiest implementation of your idea, and then you test the waters with this. So we did that before. But this year we finally released the one that is not the MVP. It's actually like a proper product, which is the one behind me. And that made a massive difference to when we went to talk to customers, because now we have like a real product, not just like a prototype. That was number one. And then number two, it would have been that we've won our first operational contract with that system. We went to do flights in Uruguay to do monitoring of illegal fishing. I think that would be the two main things so far.
I see. Is there a mistake that you made early on that you learned a valuable lesson from?
I mean, there's tons of mistakes. So, I mean, the maybe the most straightforward one was, I think early on when you start a company, you're like super naive and you think everything's going to be easy and quick, and it turns out to be much harder than you anticipated. And in some way, it's a blessing that you're that naive, because if you weren't, you would never start, because you would just realize, no, if you knew up front how hard it's going to be, I don't think you'd do it. But one of the things is we thought, okay, we have governments, say in the Caribbean, for example, where they don't have much money. So they don't know what's happening in their waters, specifically in the Caribbean, things like, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking and things. So this country can't monitor that and stop it. So we thought, nobody's serving them. Surely a startup, if we do something good, they're going to buy from us. And we didn't realize that, if you try to sell to government, it's just like there are so many layers to go through, like from, knowing the right people, timing it well with the elections, being able to do demonstrations, making sure there's not one person in the whole thing that, has his own interest that is not aligned with the project. Like, it's just, so the mistake was to believe that as a startup, we could go and win that on the basis that we would deliver value, because there's just way more other things. And the correction we made to this is we realized that actually early on we should do projects with, that are less ambitious. So it was, work with nonprofits like NGOs, going to a different country and then refine your product there. Sure, it's not like, it's very exciting work, but it's not something you're going to build a sustainable business on. So I guess, that was the mistake and how we corrected it.
All right, that's nice. And is there any question that you get asked most often about your business and you want to answer for the customers or, let's say, your audience in general?
What would be the most common one? A common one would be, why are you different? Because in the drone space, because there are lots of companies building things, and unless you're someone in the space who understands the differences, it's hard to tell if you're what's the difference. So and we're still like, when you think about like say natural selection, where ultimately most of the solution that exists today, they're all going to die out because we're all trying to figure out what's the right one. And it's because of this right now, the pool of solutions is very, very wide. So maybe a big question is like, why are we different? And I guess the main thing is because of my background of designing aircraft from scratch. Which is a very niche skill. I think I'm more capable of abstracting from the beginning, of reconstructing from scratch how you should design a drone, which means we haven't built this drone by analogy, looking at like what's out there and then deviate from it. We actually started from scratch. We said, okay, if you're flying a drone to monitor the sea, what's the metric you care about? And the metric you care about is what's the cost in dollars of square kilometer of data you collect, right? That sounds obvious, right? That's if you're monitoring, that's dollar per square kilometer. That's your metric. But most drones are not actually built this way. Most drones are built for endurance. Because if someone in the streets if you were to meet someone who builds drones, the first question you would ask is probably how long can it fly? That's the easy question that most people would ask. But that's not actually something you care about. It's like, if you buy a ticket to go somewhere, you don't care about how long it takes. You care that it's actually a small value, not a large value. You don't care that the plane is capable of flying long hours, right? You just care whether it's going to get you to where you want to go. So that's a big difference that we from scratch considered what is the metric, and we built it to be the most efficient at collecting data over a large area. And that means we haven't looked at endurance at all, like number of hours we fly. We've looked at we've looked at range, and actually range multiplied by airspeed. That's like the main metric. So that means the drone we've built is actually very fast, flies
Okay.
160 kilometer an hour.
All right.
Which for those size of drones is really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of technology to make that happen, but that's the main thing, is we have a very fast drone that, because of that, can do lots of flight in a day. And because of this, the cost of each flight hour is lower.
Yeah, I see. So for 160 kilometers per hour, how many, let's say, windows will go and do the work? Is it like in a day, it's gonna go 5 times?
So it does those 160 kilometer. It flies 160 kilometer an hour for an hour. So you basically do 160 kilometer range. And the second thing that matter, if you think mapping is like the widths that the drone can see as it flies forward, the widths of the images it captures. That's also something we've worked on, where we have our own custom sensor that is made off of several cameras pointing in different directions. So you get a slit that is quite wide. And so that's the side of this depends on how small of a target you're trying to get. If you're trying to detect a big vessel, or you're trying to detect a man in the water, you're not going to be able to have as wide of a thing. But typically now it's probably, let's say it's 3 kilometers. So you can say 3 kilometers multiplied by 160 kilometer range. That's 1 hour. Let's say you do 20 in a day, because you need time to like swap. You can get to you get to pretty high numbers pretty quickly.
That's nice.
Especially as you start operating multiple aircraft at the same time.
Yeah. Is there a piece of advice you would give to your younger self that's starting out as an entrepreneur in this industry?
Let's say if I was giving an advice to someone else who was starting a company in the drone space now or something, I mean, the main thing I feel, we've building this company. I've been building this company since 2016, so it's been a while. Like as a startup, the company's been going around for a while, and the main reason is because I always knew this industry was going to take a while to mature, because you have constraints from the regulation. It's also like, it's not just you need to design the drone. You can imagine when we design these drones, we're buying the motors from somewhere, and these motors, they need to be built by a supplier that needed to design its whole supply chain for building those motors. And then it's the same for all the components. So it's kind of like you constantly, and these manufacturers of motors, they want to know there is demand. But the people that are going to demand is like, so you end up with like, from the beginning, it's going to take a while. It's not going to be like in 2 years from now. It's not like just like a startup on a software only startup, where in 2 years you can get very big because you're not dependent on anyone. You can just build everything. It's very different in our industry. Because I knew this, I didn't go and raise a ton of capital early on, because I knew if I was going to do that, I wouldn't be able to deliver the return required by those investors. So 100%. So I raised small amounts of capital over time to slowly grow. And I think that was the only way to still be going today and be in a great position when now, as the industry is about to accelerate, for us to be able to accelerate at the same time. So thinking back, you were saying specifically, what's the advice? Well, if you pick an industry that is like ours, where it's going to take a while, you don't want to be a sprinter. You want to be someone with like a lot of stamina, who is going to keep at it for a while. And so I guess the main advice is like, if this is what you have ahead of you when you start a company, you need to just be super passionate about what you do. Because if you're doing it because it sounds cool to start a business, or like you think it's going to make you wealthy or something, which is it's very unlikely when you start a startup that it's going to be successful. You want to do it because you're super passionate, because that's going to be the only reason why you're going to stick at it for a while. It's probably fairly basic as an advice, but if you want to start a business, really look at pick something you very, very strongly care about, and use so much that most likely you're going to be caring about it for like the next 10 years.
All right, that's nice. I see. Makes sense. Okay, so you said you started the business in 2016, right? Did COVID's chaos affect the business at some point? 20?
It did. Yeah.
How did you experience it?
So on one side, it was actually not that impactful, because we were still a pretty small team. There were like 5 of us at the time.
Okay.
4 or 5, and we were all living in the same office, because it was a startup. Nice. So like the office that's still where we are now. It's a barn in the middle of the countryside, and because we all lived in the office, the whole can you commute to work and go to work and everything? It was never a problem for us because we just lived together. So it meant that the day-to-day routine of working changed nothing. Obviously, we were impacted for all the other reasons that I was impacted, but the business itself, from that perspective, was fine. The issue though was with contracts, because we had won a contract at that time that was to go abroad and do our operations with our drones in different countries. And obviously we couldn't do that. So that kind of like delayed everything. But it also gave us more time to do R&D. So I guess overall, I think we're probably less affected maybe than some of the businesses. I mean, so it was, it was interesting, but
I see.
We were not worse off than others.
Yeah, makes sense. Would you recommend other people, other entrepreneurs, to have similar environment? Like, for example, in your case, you had your workplace and your home in the same place, right?
Mm-hmm. I guess it depends how long you are gonna have to sustain it. Because I think it's fantastic to be in that environment. Like, it's super exciting, like everyone's like, very passionate about what you're building, and you don't have any commute. But it does mean that your life and work, like, it's just one and the same. And so that works if you don't do it for super long, because you're going to burn out otherwise. It also only works if your personal life with like family or like partners and whatever, like if you have kids, it's not going to work. So I think it's recommended if you're like young, you don't have too many ties, and you're full of energy, and you're going to be able to sustain this maybe for 2-3 years, and then afterwards you can transition away from that. So right now, like I moved out, like I'm not living here anymore, but I think it was really good early on to be able to do this. But yeah, it's not so, I mean, maybe unless you're Elon Musk and you keep sleeping on the floor in your different factories and things, I think it's tough to maintain long term.
I see, that's nice. Okay, let's dive into the final section, the bonus section. I'll say a word or a phrase, and you must reply with the first thought that comes to your mind. Make sense?
Yeah.
Let's see. Aerospace engineering.
The first thing that came to mind was boring. Because when you say the traditional aerospace engineering, that is in Airbus, it's when you're in a large company. And if you're in a large company like Airbus, it's 100 I think it's 150,000 people, the employees.
Okay.
So you can imagine, and you can see that all the Airbus, they mostly look the same, right? So the engineers in that company, if you have 100, I mean, not everyone is an engineer, but let's say you have, I don't know the exact number, let's say about 40,000 engineers. They're not all working, like everyone is working on a very, very small item. You're going to be designing a bolt, and you're not actually even designing the bolt. You're looking at the bolt that was designed 30 years ago, and you're looking at how you're going to change it for that. So that's why I said boring. Most aerospace engineers, I think, are doing very boring jobs, because most aerospace engineers work in those large companies. But obviously, there are sections of aerospace engineering, like what we do, that are very exciting. But that's why the first one that came to mind was boring.
I see. That's interesting. Business owners.
Responsibility. I guess that's I mean, ultimately, especially at an early stage where you have less than 10 employees, you have to cover everything that isn't someone else's ownership. And that is a lot, especially for us when we do focus a lot on R&D. So most people are like engineers, and even though they have a lot of ownership of the things, it's still like a large portion of work that goes to me. So that's why responsibility is maybe like the large scope of work. But also, you have responsibility toward investors. You have mostly responsibility towards employees, people who decide to come and work here, and then responsibility towards like customers.
Okay, I see. Entrepreneurs.
I mean, actually, the first thing that I thought was positive impact, because I think you're going to need more and more people building businesses and starting new things if you want to sustain the economy, and mostly if you want to be able to have the innovation required to solve all the problems we're facing. So whether you're talking environmental problems, social problems, so maybe positive.
I see. So necessary positive impact.
Yeah.
Okay. Emerging technologies.
The first thing that came to mind was dangerous, because I think I thought emerging technologies, and I thought, I thought AI, and then it's dangerous. But to be fair, I mean, it's not like I'm an expert in that field, and I think that's more like the natural reaction where your brain just goes towards like, oh, it's
the worst. Yeah.
Something could, but yeah, it's interesting. Like, yeah, the first, it's kind of like when the first word that comes to your mind is going to be not really the well thought through answer. So it's kind of like this comes out, and then you need to figure out, why did I think of this, even though that's not necessarily my well thought
your
out
main opinion. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
What about a phrase you mentioned previously, burning out?
The word that came to mind was like inevitable. When you're talking entrepreneurship. But I don't think I've been ever burnt out. But it's more like if you really care and you're passionate, you're gonna be working. Especially if you basically need to figure out what are your limits in some way. Because there is you could just not sleep. Like, how many days could you not sleep and just work continuously? Obviously, that's like the maximum upper limit, and you might do that very occasionally when you have like a crazy deadline or something. But that's not sustainable, right? And then on the other side, you have the limit where maybe it's like, I could work like that like my whole life, and then maybe it's like, okay, what is the max I can sustain for like 3 months because we have some crazy deadline? And so it's like, as a process of figuring out what those limits are for you, and also as they change during your life, because I don't have kids, but maybe at some point I'll have kids, so that's it's just that balance is going to be affected a little bit.
Change.
That's why I said like inevitable, is because the only way to figure out your limit is to actually reach it at some point. So again, I don't think myself I've burnt out to the point where I had to stop working for like 3 months or something, but I've definitely gotten to places where like working more was not necessarily more productive.
I see. So any last words from Matt before we close the pod?
No, yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. It was really fun. Like that final section of random questions, just first word that comes to mind and then having to justify it. No, thanks, Anthony.
Really having you. Thank you so much for being here, Matt. And that was Matt Johnsson, ladies and gentlemen.